Since the NBA introduced the Defensive Player of the Year award in 1983, the league has followed a couple very specific trends when determining the winner of the award. For one, the voters highly favor the center position. Since the award became a thing, a center has won the race 26 out of 41 times. The other major trend is that the league highly favors great defensive players on top-tier teams. In the league's history, 30 out of the 41 winners have played on a top 4 seeded team. And what's even crazier is that each and every one of those 41 winners were on a playoff team. So as you can see, the typical formula for determining the winner is simple, which is essentially who's the best defensive center of the top seeded teams. But what if we said screw the formula and instead simply gave the award to the player who was honestly the best defensive player that season, regardless of what position he played and regardless of how his team finished? Well, if we did that, things would change up quite a bit. Today, the decade we're looking at is the 1990s, and let me know in a comment if you agree or disagree with these choices. In 1990, Dennis Rodman won the DPOY, and he's actually losing the award to Hakeem Olajuwon. This was actually a very, very close race between the Worm and the Dream, as the two combined for 84 of the 92 votes. At the time, the bad boy Detroit Pistons were seen as the best defense in the entire league, which is an aspect that certainly helped Rodman secure the trophy. But if you ask me, he wasn't more deserving than Hakeem on an individual level. For one, Rodman only started in roughly half of the games that season, and he averaged just 29 minutes per game, which I actually think is a detriment to his case, considering the fact that you can't have an impact defensively while you're on the bench. On the other hand, Hakeem averaged 38.1 minutes per game, which was the 9th highest in the entire league. In that time, he averaged 2.1 steals, which was 8th in the entire league, and was easily first among centers, and he also averaged a league-leading 4.6 blocks per game, which is the 5th highest single-season average of all time. By basically every statistical measure, he was the more deserving player. He was first in defensive win shares, first in defensive plus-minus, first in defensive rating, and first in defensive rebounds. On most of these stats, Rodman wasn't even close. Again, I understand that the defensive end is more than just stats, which is especially the case for Dennis Rodman, as he was a specialist when it came to on-ball defense, which doesn't usually show up on the stat sheet. But even with that being considered, I don't see a legitimate reason as to why Hakeem doesn't get the award this season. In 1991, Dennis Rodman won his second straight DPOY, and on this new list, he's keeping the award, ahead of David Robinson, Hakeem Olajuwon, and Alvin Robertson. Now this year, Rodman's victory made a lot more sense, as he spent more minutes on the floor, he started in 77 out of the 82 games he played, and there was no one competing against him who was nearly as impressive as Hakeem was from the previous season. In 1991 especially, Rodman was the engine that drove the Pistons' defense. Unlike his fellow stars who were reaching the twilight of their careers, Rodman was at his prime age and was providing the very best of his energy and athleticism on a nightly basis. It's also worth mentioning that this version of Rodman was one of the most versatile defenders that we've ever seen, as he spent time defending point guards like Magic Johnson, shooting guards like Michael Jordan, small forwards like Larry Bird, and he even had strength to guard power forwards like Charles Barkley and Karl Malone. There were some other solid candidates, but for me, Rodman stood out amongst the crowd. In 1992, David Robinson was voted as the league's top defender, but on my list, he narrowly loses the award to Dennis Rodman. This was yet another extremely close race, as the two greats were separated by only a total of 7 votes. Robinson will go down as one of the most impressive losers of this entire series, as he was a rim-protecting monster for San Antonio that year. Over the course of the season, he averaged a monstrous 2.3 steals and 4.5 blocks per game, which were the best averages among centers that season. His 47-win Spurs likely don't even make the playoffs if it wasn't for his defensive impact. But here's the thing, Robinson only played in 68 games that regular season, compared to Rodman, who played all 82. That's instantly 14 games guaranteed where Dennis had a greater defensive impact. In terms of blocks and steals, Rodman's averages were as underwhelming as ever. But concerning his suffocating on-ball defense, he was in peak shape. That year, he actually led the league in defensive win shares with a total of 7, which was not only the best in the NBA, but it was actually the highest single-season total of his entire Hall of Fame career. I have no issues with anyone who wants to pick the Admiral, but for myself personally, the best ability is availability, and for that reason especially, Rodman gets the edge yet again. In 1993, Hakeem Olajuwon won his first official DPOY, and on my list, he keeps the award, well ahead of David Robinson and Michael Jordan. Typically, Dennis Rodman would have been in this mix as well, but a combination of injuries and off-the-court issues caused him to play in only 62 games that season. Unlike the last 2 seasons before this, Olajuwon played in all 82 games, and he was his usual two-way dominant self in those contests. His 1.8 steals were once again first among centers, and his 4.2 blocks led the entire NBA, and by quite a wide margin. Houston was a top 3 team defensively in both points allowed and defensive rating, and there's no question that they wouldn't have been close to those rankings without the Dream in the middle. David Robinson and Michael Jordan tied for second, and if Olajuwon wasn't in the league, then that would have been a tough choice. But with Olajuwon's usual dominance, there's really not much reason to elaborate further. In 1994, Hakeem Olajuwon won the award yet again, and he keeps the award in what was likely the most competitive race in DPOY history. Here's a breakdown of how the voting went. Hakeem took the top spot with 24 votes. Robinson finished second with 23 votes, then Mutombo with 19, Pippen with 11, Gary Payton with 9, and Dennis Rodman with 8. Honestly, these were basically all the usual suspects from the 1990s, and there's probably a solid argument for any one of these players. But I think they got it right by giving the slight edge to Olajuwon. As usual, he had the highest combination of blocks and steals in the entire league. He played 80 out of the 82 games, and of the top 3 candidates, he was leading in defensive win shares and defensive rating. If you care more about the eye test than the actual stats, then simply ask any longtime Rockets fan just how good Hakeem Olajuwon was in 1994, and they'll never stop singing his praises. In 1995, Dikembe Mutombo won his first DPOY, but on my list, he's losing the award to the all-time great Scottie Pippen. Mount Mutombo certainly has an argument, as he was in elite form with his Denver Nuggets, and on the year, he averaged 0.5 steals and a league-leading 3.9 blocks. He carried his Nuggets on that end of the court, as they didn't have many good defensive players outside of him, which was one of the major reasons why they only finished with a 41-41 record. On the other hand, there's Scottie Pippen, whose value cannot be overstated. This season, Pippen averaged a league-leading 2.9 steals and a team-leading 1.1 blocks, as he is one of only 5 players to lead his team in all 5 major stat categories over the course of a season. He was also extremely clutch that year for Chicago on defense, and in several one-possession games, he was making key stops down the stretch. I can appreciate an argument in favor of either player, but for me, Pippen's season was more historically impressive in the grand scheme of things. In 1996, Gary Payton won his first and only DPOY, and he's keeping it ahead of Scottie Pippen, David Robinson, and Dikembe Mutombo. The glove led his Sonics to a 64-18 record while having the second best defense in the entire league, trailing only the 72-10 Bulls. It was Payton that gave Seattle their tenacious and energetic identity. Without question, he's an all-time great defender, and this season specifically was where he was at his very best. On the year, he averaged 2.9 steals, which was a career high, and he led the entire NBA that season. He also finished with more defensive win shares than Scottie Pippen and Dikembe Mutombo, who were the players in second and third place. Whether it was the stats, the eye test, or the amount of value to his team, the glove gets the edge for me. In 1997, Dikembe Mutombo won the DPOY, and on this new list, he keeps the award ahead of Gary Payton and Mookie Blaylock. It was his first season with the Atlanta Hawks, but at that point in his career, it didn't matter where Mutombo was. He was gonna use his insane length and his impressive instincts to contest just about every shot in the painted area. The 30-year-old Mutombo led the league in most advanced stats on the defensive end, all while putting up 3.3 blocks per game. Gary Payton wasn't quite as amazing as he was in '96, but regardless, any year where the glove is in his 20s, he's gonna be in the mix. Ultimately, the finger-wagging Mutombo was just too elite at this point for me to even think about sending the award someplace else. In 1998, Dikembe Mutombo won his second straight DPOY, and he's keeping the award once again ahead of Gary Payton. This was yet another insanely close race, as Dikembe finished with 39 votes while Payton had just 37. Honestly though, the race was extremely similar to the year prior. Both players played all 82 games, and the defensive numbers they put up were extremely similar as well. Regardless, I believe Mutombo was still a more intimidating defensive player at this point in his career, and with his 3.4 blocks per game, it's certainly hard to argue otherwise. Gary was still a worthy candidate, but his steals, his defensive plus-minus, and many other defensive aspects of his game had declined since the previous 2 seasons, which is another reason why Mutombo keeps his edge. In 1999, Alonzo Mourning won his first DPOY, and he keeps the award, finally taking attention away from Mutombo and Payton. Alonzo had always been a great defensive player throughout his career, but specifically in this lockout-shortened season, Mourning took his defensive performances to another level entirely. Because of the lockout, the 98-99 NBA season didn't start until February 5th of 1999. This meant that teams had to play a grueling schedule of 50 games in just a few months. Alonzo was a player who dealt with this brutal schedule better than most, and on the year, he averaged a league-leading 3.9 blocks per game. All-time great rim protectors like Dikembe Mutombo, Hakeem Olajuwon, and David Robinson averaged 1 to 1.5 blocks less than Mourning, which tells you the shot-swatting season that he was having. You could try to make an argument for another player, but for me, Alonzo was in a league of his own defensively in '99. So what do you guys think? Do you agree with the list? Is there anyone who should have won the award instead? I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments section below. Thanks for watching as always, make sure to like and subscribe for more basketball content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.